Have you ever heard the saying, you strain a gnat but swallow a camel? It's a powerful image, right? Tedious, careful work to filter out a tiny, insignificant bug from your drink, only to gulp down a massive, unclean animal without a second thought. This isn't just a random proverb. It's one of the most blistering critiques Jesus ever delivered, and it's aimed directly at the religious leaders of his day. Today, we're diving deep into Matthew chapter 23, a passage often called the chapter of woes, to understand what made Jesus so righteously angry and what it means for us. So, let's set the scene. This is happening during the last week of Jesus' life. He's in Jerusalem, in the temple courts, the very heart of Jewish religious life. He's been teaching, and he's been clashing with the scribes and the Pharisees all week. They've been trying to trap him with tricky questions about taxes, the resurrection, and the greatest commandment. But Jesus, being Jesus, has navigated every trap with divine wisdom. Now, the tables are turning. He's finished answering their questions, and he's about to go on the offensive. He turns to the crowds and his disciples and launches into one of the most intense monologues in the entire Bible. He starts by acknowledging the authority of the scribes and Pharisees. He says, "The scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat, so do and observe whatever they tell you." This is fascinating. He isn't telling people to throw out the law. He's affirming that these leaders teach from a position of authority, a lineage traced back to Moses. But then comes the big but. He immediately follows up with, "But not the works they do. For they preach, but do not practice." And that's the core of the problem, hypocrisy. They talk the talk, but didn't walk the walk. Jesus paints a vivid picture of this hypocrisy. He says they do all their deeds to be seen by others. They make their phylacteries small leather boxes containing scripture verses, worn on the forehead and arm extra wide. They make the tassels on their garments extra long. Why? To look super spiritual. It was all about external appearances. They loved getting the best seats at banquets and in the synagogues, and they loved being called rabbi in the marketplace. It was all about status, honor, and public praise. Their religion was a performance. Then, Jesus drops the first of 7 woes. A woe in this context isn't just saying, "Oh, that's too bad." It's a declaration of judgment and a lament. It's a cry of grief over their spiritual condition. The first woe, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. For you neither enter yourselves nor allow those who would enter to go in." Imagine that. The very people who were supposed to be the gatekeepers, the guides to God, were actually acting as bouncers, blocking the door. Their complex, man-made rules, and their burdensome interpretation of the law made it impossible for ordinary people to feel like they could ever measure up. They were so focused on the fence they built around the law, that they forgot the purpose of the law was to lead people to God. The second woe is about their predatory practices. "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you travel across sea and land to make a single proselyte, and when he becomes a proselyte, you make him twice as much a child of hell as yourselves." That's harsh. They would go to extreme lengths to convert someone to Judaism, but what were they converting them to? Not to a life-giving relationship with God, but to their own brand of dead, legalistic, hypocritical religion. They were replicating their own spiritual brokenness in their converts. The third woe tackles their twisted logic about oaths. They had created a whole system where swearing by the temple was nothing, but swearing by the gold of the temple was binding. Swearing by the altar meant nothing, but swearing by the gift on the altar was what mattered. Jesus calls them blind guides. He points out the absurdity, which is greater, the gold or the temple that makes the gold sacred, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred. They were elevating material things above God himself, completely missing the point. Their intricate rules were a way to get around telling the truth, to manipulate language for their own benefit. And this leads us directly to the fourth woe, which contains our central phrase. "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you tithe, mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness." This is the gnat and the camel. Tithing was the practice of giving 10% of your produce to God. These leaders were so meticulous that they would count out the tiniest herbs from their garden mint, dill cumin to make sure they gave exactly 1/10. That's straining the gnat. It's a focus on the tiniest, most minute detail of the law, but in doing so, they completely ignored what Jesus calls the weightier matters, the big stuff. Justice, caring for the poor and the oppressed. Mercy, showing compassion and forgiveness. Faithfulness, being loyal and true to God and to others. They were so busy counting their spice seeds that they walked right past the widow who needed help, the orphan who needed care, and the foreigner who needed welcome. They swallowed the camel of injustice and hard-heartedness while congratulating themselves on their spiritual discipline. Jesus says, "These you ought to have done." Without neglecting the others, he's not saying the details don't matter, but they are meaningless if the heart of the matter, love for God and neighbor, is missing. The fifth woe continues this theme of externals versus internals. "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you clean the outside of the cup and the plate, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence." They looked squeaky clean on the outside. They followed all the ceremonial washing rules. Their public persona was spotless, but inwardly, their hearts were filthy, filled with greed and a desire to please themselves. Jesus tells them to clean the inside first, and then the outside will become clean as well. True transformation starts from the heart. If your heart is right with God, your actions will naturally follow. The sixth woe is perhaps the most graphic. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you are like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, but within are full of dead people's bones and all uncleanness. In that culture, touching a tomb would make you ritually unclean. So, tombs were painted with whitewash to make them highly visible so people could avoid them. They looked bright, clean, and beautiful from a distance, but inside, death and decay. This is how Jesus saw the Pharisees. Outwardly, they looked righteous and holy, but inwardly, they were spiritually dead, full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. It's a devastating indictment of their entire religious system. Finally, the seventh woe. They built beautiful tombs for the prophets and decorated the monuments of the righteous, saying, "If we had lived in the days of our fathers, we would not have taken part with them in shedding the blood of the prophets." They honored the dead prophets while rejecting the living one standing right in front of them. Jesus says that by doing this, they are testifying against themselves that they are the sons of those who murdered the prophets. And he prophesies that they will continue this legacy by persecuting, flogging, and killing the messengers he sends to them. They were repeating the very sins of their ancestors that they claimed to condemn. After this relentless series of woes, Jesus' tone shifts from fiery anger to deep, heartbreaking sorrow. He looks out over the city and cries, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often would I have gathered your children together, as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing." You can feel the anguish in his voice. This wasn't just an angry rant. It was a lament from a God whose heart was breaking for his people. He longed to protect them, to gather them in, to save them. But they refused. So, what's the takeaway for us? It's easy to read Matthew 23 and point fingers at the Pharisees. But the real challenge is to turn the finger back at ourselves. Where in our lives are we straining gnats and swallowing camels? Are we more concerned with appearing spiritual than with actually being spiritual? Are we obsessed with the minor details of our faith, the right worship style, the perfect theological wording while neglecting justice, mercy, and faithfulness? Do we clean the outside of our lives for everyone to see while our hearts are full of greed, envy, or bitterness? Jesus' blistering critique in Matthew 23 is a wake-up call. It's a call to authentic, heart-deep faith. It's a reminder that God is far more interested in the condition of our hearts than the perfection of our religious performance. He doesn't want whitewashed tombs. He wants living temples. He wants us to focus on the big things, loving God with everything we have and loving our neighbors as ourselves. Let us not be so busy counting our spices that we miss the person God has placed in our path to love. Thanks for watching. If this resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into Scripture. Let me know in the comments what you think about this powerful chapter. See you next time.